Imagine a massive jigsaw puzzle representing our economy. Each piece is like a part of the financial system, fitting together to keep things running smoothly. But what if I told you that some experts are worried that this puzzle might fall apart? One of those experts is Jim Rickards, a smart guy who's been thinking a lot about money and the economy. He's waving a red flag, saying that the next time something goes wrong, the whole economy might collapse like a house of cards. So what's Rickards so concerned about? It's something called the debt to GDP ratio. I know it sounds like a bunch of fancy words, but stick with me. I'll break it down. Picture your wallet. Now, imagine you have a big debt of $50,000 on your credit card. If you're making $30,000 a year, that's not great. It's like trying to pay rent, bills, and buy groceries while carrying a heavy backpack full of debt. But if you were making a whopping $5 million a year, that $50,000 debt might not seem like a big deal. You could pay it off without breaking a sweat. Now apply that idea to a whole country. The debt to GDP ratio is like looking at a country's income and its debt. If the debt is a small part of the income, things are probably okay. But if the debt starts to grow and eat up a big chunk of the income, that's where the trouble starts. Rickards is saying that the United States has been borrowing a lot of money, around $31 trillion to be exact. That's like having a mountain of debt, and guess what? That debt is getting bigger compared to how much money the country is making. That's the GDP part. The debt to GDP ratio has gone from 106% to 131% in just a short time. But why is this a big deal? Well, Rickards believes that if this ratio goes too high, it's like driving a car with too much weight in the back. The car might start to wobble and struggle to move forward. Similarly, when a country's debt gets too high, it can struggle to keep its economy going. Rickards even has a magic number, 90%. When the debt to GDP ratio crosses 90%, things start to go haywire. It's like a tipping point where borrowing money doesn't help the economy as much as before. Think of it this way. If you borrowed $1 and spent it, you might get $1.30 of growth, assuming you spent it wisely. But as that debt ratio climbs higher, that exact growth gets smaller and smaller. It's like borrowing $1, spending it, and only getting back 95 cents worth of growth. When the debt to GDP ratio is high, borrowing more money doesn't give you the same bang for your buck. And according to Rickards, the United States is way past that critical point. Jim Rickards is worried that if we're not careful with how much money we're borrowing compared to what we're making, the whole financial system could crumble like a house made of cards. Rickards is urging us to pay attention to this debt to GDP ratio because it could determine whether our economy stands strong or falls apart when the next crisis hits. Alright, imagine you're building a really cool tower out of playing cards. You carefully stack them up, one on top of the other, making sure everything is just right. But what if someone accidentally bumps the table? The tower comes crashing down, right? Well, that's kind of like what Jim Rickards is worried about when it comes to our economy. He's thinking about something called supply chains, which are like the invisible strings that hold everything together in the world of stuff we buy. You see, when you buy something, let's say a simple loaf of bread, it's not just about the bread. Think of it as a puzzle made up of lots of little pieces. The baker needs flour. The flour comes from wheat, and the wheat is grown by a farmer. But that's not all. There's also packaging for the bread, like plastic or paper, and someone has to transport all these things from one place to another. Each of these steps is part of what we call a supply chain. Now here's the twist. Over time, these supply chains got super complicated. Companies wanted to save money, so they figure out how to make things as cheap as possible. It sounds good, right? But Jim Rickards says, not so fast. Sure, it made things cheaper, but it also made everything super fragile. Imagine if your tower of playing cards was made out of super thin paper instead of sturdy cards. If you accidentally bumped the table, it would fall apart much more easily. That's the problem with our supply chains. They're like fragile towers waiting to tumble. Now let's get back to the bread example. Picture this. You go to the store and there's no hot sauce on the shelf. What's the big deal, right? But here's the thing. There might not be any hot sauce because the supply chain behind it is struggling. You might not realize it, but every step in making and delivering hot sauce involves lots of different parts, like plastic bottles, labels, and even transportation. If one of those parts has a problem, like a shortage or a delay, the whole thing falls apart. That's why sometimes you see empty shelves at the store. So why does this matter? Well, Jim Rickards says that these fragile supply chains are a big deal because they can make problems worse. Imagine everyone is worried that there might be enough hot sauce, so they all rush to buy it whenever they see it. It's like everybody suddenly wants to buy a ticket to a concert and the ticket website crashes because it can't handle so many people at once. That's what happens when supply chains crash. People start buying way more than usual because they're scared things will run out, and that just makes the problem even bigger. But wait, there's more. Jim Rickards has another idea. He's saying that we need to start thinking about our supply chains in a different way. He's talking about a college of nations. Imagine it's like a club of countries that trade with each other. These countries would be like friends who trust each other and work together. They'd have strong economies and smart rules to keep things running smoothly. Rickards says we need to be part of this club to make sure our supply chains don't fall apart when something bad happens. In a nutshell, Jim Rickards is telling us that our economy is like a tower made of playing cards, fragile and ready to collapse. He's saying that these complicated supply chains are a big part of the problem. When one part of the supply chain breaks, it can set off a chain reaction, just like a tower of cards falling down. That's why he's suggesting we build a college of nations to make our supply chain stronger and more reliable. So the next time you pick up a loaf of bread or grab a bottle of hot sauce, remember there's a whole puzzle behind it, and Jim Rickards is trying to make sure it doesn't fall apart. Alright, we've got one more piece of the puzzle, the grand finale. Jim Rickards has been talking about how fragile our economy can be and how supply chains are like the strings holding everything together. But don't worry, he's got some ideas about how we can make things better and stronger. Imagine you're in a club, like a group of friends who look out for each other. Well, that's kind of what Jim Rickards is suggesting for countries around the world. He's saying that if countries team up and work together, they can make their supply chains way more stable. Remember, a supply chain is like a bunch of steps that need to happen to make something. It's like a relay race where everyone passes the baton smoothly. So here's the deal. Jim Rickards wants countries that trust each other to work together. These countries would follow smart rules and have strong economies. It's kind of like having backup plans for when things go wrong. Let's say one country has a problem, like a shortage of a certain thing. Well, the other countries in the club could help out and make sure everyone still gets what they need. So what's the bottom line? Jim Rickards wants us to be ready for the next time something bad happens to our economy. He wants us to be like those clever builders who use stronger materials to make sturdier tower of cards. By teaming up with other countries, making smart rules, and being prepared for problems, we can make sure our economy doesn't crash when the next crisis hits. So the next time you see an empty shelf at the store or hear about problems in the news, just remember that Jim Rickards has some great ideas to help us build a safer and stronger future for our economy. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos and insightful discussion on the economy.
I mean, there's a big section on Russia and Ukraine. There's a big section on the climate scam. There's a big section. Imagine that might not go over too well in Australia, but again, it's got 200 footnotes. So I'm always open to debate, but go read a lot of the primary sources, and one can draw your own conclusions. But there's a lot on climate change. There's a lot on Ukraine. There's a lot on China. And rather than recite it all, just if you ask me to put it into kind of one headline, China has peaked. They're a nation in decline, economically, financially, demographically. This notion that the 20th century was the American century and